Good afternoon. So I spent much of my consulting career in China, helping companies and governments in technology. But I've also been involved in the Global Agenda Council on emerging or new growth models of the World Economic Forum. And through that, I've gotten to learn a little bit about Tanzania. And so that'll be the subject of my quick little story to get us kicked off. On my Global Agenda Council is a wonderful entrepreneur, a lady named Victoria Kansambo. And Victoria has a business that leases equipment to other women entrepreneurs in Tanzania and helps them start businesses. And this lady, Saidat Ramadani, is one of Victoria's clients. Victoria leased to her a milling machine which can be used to grind corn into flour. And this became Saidat's business. Now, when she first started out, she struggled with all of the logistical complexities of making this business work because she had to travel far into the rural areas of Tanzania to find farmers who had corn to sell. She had to carry large amounts of cash with her to make those purchases. And then she had to try to orchestrate the supply chain to bring the corn back to the town where she was doing the milling. And then one day, Saidat got a mobile phone. And a few months and years later, virtually everybody else that she needed to interact with got a mobile phone. And that phone got more and more capable, such that it included payment system capabilities and whatnot. And as that flourished, her business flourished as well. Because now she's no longer needing to travel all over Tanzania, and she's no longer needing to carry large amounts of cash. She interacts via the mobile networks and manages payments via the mobile payment system. And as the networks have gotten more sophisticated, she's shipping photographs, video clips, checking the quality of the corn before she buys it. And now she has a flourishing branded multi-location business. She is included in the economy, and all of the people who she has helped pull as this intermediary are now also part of this economy as well. So there's good parts to the story and also a cautionary part to the story. So the good part is that there are multiple mobile networks in Tanzania. There's 3 3G operators. There's now 2 4G networks. There's more than 60% of the population has a mobile phone. And so also the right spectrum has been cleared so that it's more straightforward to provide mobile networks in rural areas. But there's also some cautionary notes as well. The 3 and 4G networks that have been deployed, particularly the 4G network, which is the most advanced that we're all using in our pockets most likely, has only been deployed in a few cities and not nationwide. Also, the mobile industry has become a little bit of a cookie jar in Tanzania as well. So recently, there was a 14% excise tax placed on all mobile services, a 10% transaction tax on all mobile payments, and the total amount of tax that the mobile sector pays relative to its revenues is now 36%. So there's an additional 36% of tax on top of what the services actually cost. And this is all happening while the deployment of the most advanced networks has not yet reached much of the population, but is only in the major cities. And so we see the benefits, but we see the challenges as well. How will this evolve, and how will this evolve in many other markets? That's the question that I want to quickly put to you today. What is really amazing is how far the technology of the mobile network has developed. Not only the amazing functionality of our smartphones, but the network that connects them. And this chart just looks at both the cost effectiveness of mobile data transmission as we've gone through multiple generations from 2G to 3G to 4G, and persons' typical usage. Suffice it to say that the 4G network that you use today is roughly 12,000 times faster in terms of its ability to handle data, and about 99% cheaper in the cost of transmitting that data on a per megabyte basis. And we'd be hard-pressed to think of many other industries that have increased their speed by 12,000 times and reduced the cost by 99%. And that is in an industry where essentially any phone from any network operator is going to work with any other device. How many of you have kids at home, and how many of you have an Xbox? Probably a lot of people have an Xbox. Some people have an Xbox. Do you also have a PlayStation? Yes. Do you also have a Wii? Yes. So you have an Xbox and a PlayStation and a Wii, which is an example of an industry where there were not standards and there wasn't connectivity. So you've bought 3 of them instead of 1. The mobile industry has enabled you really to have any device interoperating with any other. That has expanded the connectivity of the network and made it incredibly valuable. So I was involved in some research looking at how consumers valued mobility in a variety of markets around the world. And the findings led to this little discussion today. We did a conjoint analysis in 6 countries around the world, trying to get at what people would be willing to pay for the mobile service relative to what they're actually paying. You can think of that as a way of measuring the consumer surplus, the surplus benefit over and above what you actually pay of these services. And it's striking how much we would all be willing to pay to keep the devices and the network connections. In the US and Germany, for example, it was around $6,000 a year that we say we'd be willing to pay over and above what we actually pay, which is about 10 or 15% of the average income in those countries. But when we looked at emerging markets, what was dramatic was how much people would be willing to pay relative to their own incomes. And so in China and India, the thousands of consumers we interacted with said, you know, I would pay almost half my income to hang on to this service. It's so valuable to me. And that was really reflected in the answers to further questions that we asked people. So the shaded bars on top are the China and India results compared to the results in developed markets. And so people said, I feel more secure when I have my mobile phone. My mobile phone is the most powerful tool in modern life. 78% of people in China and India agreed with that. My mobile phone has allowed me to make new income or pursue new business opportunities. Almost 2/3 of people in China and India agreed with that. So one observation I would make is almost the poorer you are, the less included you are, the more valuable this particular set of services is to you, the more empowering that it is. And clearly, it has unleashed all kinds of creative ideas. A number of the ideas that we heard today are in some ways dependent upon mobile connectivity. This is a great example that you may be familiar with from India, a service called Fight Back, an app that provides security and protection to women who might be traveling alone in areas where they feel vulnerable. But all kinds of solutions can be developed on top of this connectivity. So what's the problem? Isn't this just going to happen? Aren't these networks just going to continue to roll out? Well, if we reflect back to the story on Tanzania, the answer is, well, maybe, but maybe not. And so this is a look at, and I've taken 4G as an example simply because it is the kind of most advanced generation that the telecom industry has agreed upon. And by the year 2020, we expect that developed markets, more than 90% of the population will be using a 4G service. By 2020, in most developing countries, the average is going to be about 30 to 35%. This is for a technology that was fully developed before the year 2008 and began commercial deployment in 2009. If you could move that number by 10%, that's 500 million people. So if we could move that number by 20%, it's more than 1 billion people. So why doesn't my smartphone have a network in a lot of countries? There's a list here. You know, trying to protect the local industry means I can't get affordable handsets. I got to pay a bribe if I'm an operator and I want to put in a new cell site. I got to lease equipment from the monopoly incumbent, or the spectrum's not been made available, or the operator is bankrupt because he's not in a viable business situation. And as we look forward, the penetration rates that are forecast for different markets vary dramatically. And if Saidot was just a few miles north in Ethiopia, she would have no ability to really be connected to a modern network for the foreseeable future. So there are some barriers to this that our paper outlines. There's a failure of many governments actually to set ubiquitous advanced mobile access as a development goal. You'd be surprised the extent to which it's not really a goal that takes primacy over others. There are some very challenging tactical issues around the deployment of radio spectrum. The most efficient radio spectrum for rural areas often is already being used by military or by TV broadcasters or others and needs to be vacated. There's insufficient incentive for the capital investment that is needed. There's a failure to address affordability, and in fact, there's layering on of taxes which move in the other direction. And there's a need to stimulate local content and services. So we think that the impact of more attention in this area would be significant. If I go back to the consumer surplus insights, if on average the consumer surplus of the new mobile subscriber is $1,000 a year, I bring 1 billion more people on, I create $1 trillion of surplus in the global economy. We've looked at the GDP impact. It's also significant by more traditional measures. And the massive impact on inclusiveness, because the incremental subscriber that we're talking about now is somebody who is typically otherwise not well connected to the global economy. This is one of our best opportunities to do so. So there are some specific actions that we are recommending here. I'd like to take some of the research that I've done in China and India and extend it to other markets so that we have really quantifiable evidence of the value. Secondly, I think there's a real opportunity to issue a challenge to national governments to make advanced ubiquitous mobile access a priority. And through the auspices of entities like the World Economic Forum, CID, the GSMA, one can certainly develop a scorecard for countries that makes much more transparent where they really stand in this regard. We could focus that on a set of countries, and for those countries we could develop more specific pathways to better access. In some instances it's about taxes, in some instances it's about economics, in some areas it's about spectrum. It's a different set of issues in each country. And then lastly, I think through these auspices we can call upon a number of organizations who can help with funding and technical assistance to make this happen. Thank you.
This is what he says, right? It's a huge opportunity. And so with that, I want to then sort of launch into where I think it could be made even better. So don't, as a previous commentator said, don't take this as negative. Take it as an incredible positive. It's where I devote most of my efforts. So I just want to mention a little bit about who I am, just because it's relevant. So faculty at MIT, helped create the Media Lab. I also sit with the board of directors of Telefonica, which handles a large fraction of the telecommunications in Latin America. Same thing with AT&T and with Google. So I know something about some of these areas. I also work with the World Economic Forum and helped co-lead a number of the things there, data for development, privacy, and so forth. And a part of the Secretary General of the UN's Data Revolution Group to do just these sorts of things. is the idea that, if we had data and connectivity, we could really change the way the Sustainable Development Goals will function and our chance of succeeding. So with all that said, first of all, it's a couple picky things, which is that I found the particular paper, but not your earlier papers, just the background papers, to be a little optimistic. And it was optimistic in the sense that, 15 years ago, there were papers from the International Telecommunications Union showing that just having a featured phone in a very poor country added $500 to the GDP. That's only gotten better as these things have gotten more capable. But the effect is a saturating one because it's mostly about SMEs. It's mostly about these small entrepreneurs. It's not, your kid talking to his girlfriend or whatever, right? It's about coordination and things like that. So I found the figures a little bit optimistic, but not huge. The other thing is, I'm a pretty wired guy. I go around the world, all that stuff. I don't have 4G most of the time. I'm a subscriber to T-Mobile. What they do is they give me 2.5 or 3 or 4 as it exists. And they just give me the extra part because I only pay 25 bucks a month. Anywhere in the world, unlimited data, but sometimes it's a little slow. And I can sort of testify that 4G is great, but you don't have to have it. And in terms of dollars per bit, 4G is great, but in terms of CapEx, capital investment, 2.5 just beats it hollow because you can do minor modifications to get data rates that are not great, but they're acceptable. I lived with it for years. So that makes it even more inexcusable that governments aren't putting that as a priority because it's cheap. Right? You could provide data everywhere, cheap. So a couple things that I've seen come up is that people mention about Facebook providing free connectivity. And one of my former students, Nathan Eagle, has a company called Jana that provides free connectivity in return for seeing ads and being part of a commercial thing. I'm a little sort of questionable about that because those tend to be walled gardens. It's digital connectivity, but it's not general purpose connectivity, and I think that that's probably a bit of a mistake. And then the question comes up, well, what of regulation? Well, so I've seen it from the carrier side. I also lived in India for a bit where I helped change the telecommunications law and in particular open up some of the spectrum. Spectrum allocations around the world are stupid. They're little bits and pieces of spectrum. The military controls huge amounts of them. Some of them are just not used, but they're holding on to it with their cold, dead hands. And what that means is when you buy handsets or build towers, they cost a lot more because they have to be specially customized. They only work in certain areas. People just have to, bite the bullet and allocate these things in a rational and sort of uniform way around the world. It would reduce the costs and spread things quite a bit more. But I'm not in favor of some of the regulation, for instance, to support people's cost of buying things. I think the market has done a really good job. And you want to see the competition. So in this country, for instance, we're beginning to regulate our wireless services quite a bit more. And the question is how much is that going to limit investment in that? And I can tell you from sitting on the board, the people look at that and they say, well, look, the return on investment on this is X. That's not enough. And so the discussion in the board is, no, we're not going to invest in these rural areas because the return on investment is limited. Why is the return on investment limited? Well, the reason is regulation. Most of the money in telecommunications is made by over-the-top services. You all use, WhatsApp and this and that and the other thing, right? Those guys make tons of money. The telco just carries the bits, and that's a commodity business. And the reason is that they're heavily regulated. They can't offer these things, whereas WhatsApp and things like that are almost completely unregulated, and so they can just go wild. There needs to be a little more fairness in there, I think, or at least it needs to be thought about. I'm not going to advocate one side or the other, but it doesn't seem to be a playing ground in terms of regulation that allows people who are putting money into infrastructure to return benefits on it very well. The other thing that I think is actually really a missed opportunity, I get to see a lot of discussions about disaster and disaster recovery. And the thing that almost always starts the discussion is, well, after the cell towers went out and you couldn't talk to, well, you know, they don't have to go out. There are diesel generators, there are other solar panels, there are things that could keep them going, but it's not in the interest of the operator to do that because it's pretty expensive. But it is a primary function of government to support communities in the case of disaster. So I think if regulation was such that, if countries were such that they supported emergency use of these networks, you'd see the cost of building some in rural areas drop dramatically. And you get this sort of huge rollout in the rural areas, while at the same time solving one of the biggest problems, which is communication during disasters. And I just don't know why people don't do that. From all the sides that I've seen, it's an obvious thing to do. So we could get greater GDP, more resilience to disasters, and it wouldn't have to cost all that much. And that's a pretty good mix. So that's what I have to say about it. Okay?